good evening, and welcome to tonight to the OKS King's Talks. It's about careers, it's about life decision making, it's about well-being, inclusion, and in general, living as a young adult. My name is Greg Hunter, and I'm the Deputy Head Co-Curricular here at King's. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome back virtually King's former Broughton girl, Elinor Henry, as she presents Lessons Learned in My Gap Decade. Elle left King's in 2012 and went straight to Australia for a gap year, but she didn't return to England and some 8 years later in 2020. Elle was involved in many creative events and marketing workplaces and led teams working across festivals and events all over Australia. Ja Rule and Ashanti are examples of those creative leads for musicians and tours that she led. Elle also recently left Google after working 3 years there, including being part of wellbeing and inclusion. This was an absolutely fascinating talk, and we're privileged to have Elle with us. Please, at any time, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A function of Zoom or put your virtual hand up to ask the question of Elle yourself. And now it was great pleasure to welcome Elle. Welcome, Elle.
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and yeah, for the very warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be chatting to you all tonight. I'm very, very excited.
Thanks, we are too. So, firstly, please tell us about your memories of King's. You left in 2012 and a Broughton girl. Tell me about that.
Okay, so memories of King's, I would say I categorize into two things, basically the people and also the environment. So for me, I have really strong memories of the other pupils there, the amazing times we had exploring the city. I obviously have memories of my amazing matron, Carol French, running after me with a hairbrush every morning, trying to brush my hair. And obviously the other amazing staff that just helped us in whatever way they could. And then also the environment there. I mean, to be honest, it was incredible being in a city environment for the first time in my life. And yeah, wandering around and exploring such a historic place, I think added to a certain magic of the place. Yeah.
Excellent. And before we go, I know you've got a bit of presentation in a moment. Before we go into that, please tell me about what happened straight after you left and what ended up making that decision that it's time to go and explore Australia.
So my two other friends from King's actually and I weren't really ready to go to university immediately, and we were kind of like, umming and erring. And so my friend, her uncle had this catering company on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So we just emailed the uncle and decided to head on over to the other side of the world and work over there for a bit and see what happens. And obviously I didn't come back till 2020. So you could say it was a success in some ways.
Absolutely. Lots of, as we're about to find out, lots of lessons learned. So shall we go to the presentation?
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much. Okay, lessons learned in my gap decade. So before we get into it, I just want to mention three things really quickly. I want to acknowledge my privilege as a white woman, having been able to study at King's in sixth form. I think please keep that in mind whilst listening. It's really important to think of these things whilst we discuss anything about career development or, life development. The second is that I'm always learning. I'm not a finished product like any other human. So I welcome your feedback. If anything stands out to you that you want to bring up, go for it. I'm very open. So store your questions. And then the third, I'm here for all of you King students. So yeah, just have a think. What's useful to you? What do you want to know? What more do you want to hear about? And yeah, bring that to me in the Q&A, and I'll try and remain as open and as authentic as possible whilst answering all your questions. So thank you. If we can go to the next slide. So this is me in Australia on the left, and then we've got a classic me gap year Australia in a Santa hat on the beach. I'm going to talk about three main themes that I've learned from my last decade. I joke about it being a gap decade because I didn't follow a traditional path, but I really want to normalize this. So with that said, just quickly on me, as Greg mentioned, I moved to Australia straight after King's, basically in September 2012. I spent the next decade forging a career in communication, design, etc. Anything from UX design, graphic design. Then I started working in FinTech, then learning and development. I moved to Google 6 years after I had arrived in Australia, and then in 2020 moved back with Google to London. And then last year I quit my job in August after months and months of deliberation to pursue art, fine art, full-time. And this year in September I started studying at the Royal College of Art, my dream school. Yeah, and that's basically my life in a nutshell so far. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so here are the three things I really want to touch on today. I know it's quite broad, it's quite varied, but these are the three of the things that I found crucial, really, when it comes to reflecting on my past. And so hopefully these nuggets can help you. So the first one is really decision making. So I'd really encourage you to stop and pause, take time if you need, whether that's a gap year or a couple of weeks, a couple of months. Just find that ability to stop and to question things in a constructive way, of course, and with a goal in mind. But you don't need to keep rushing without taking that time to reflect. Understand who's in the driver's seat when making decisions. I would say, think about it. Is your decision that you're heading into a product of the group around you, or something that you thought you wanted to do when you were 5 years old, but you haven't really allowed yourself time to fully reflect on what you enjoy right now and what the next thing that might interest you might be. So question your decision making, get to the root of why you're doing things, and that really involves taking time. So for me, I got to Australia, and it was actually the time and space, the physical space, but also the actual time away from the UK, away from my family, away from school, that allowed me to understand that I didn't want to do my English degree necessarily right then and there, that I was more interested in pursuing art and design. So that's a little example. Another item just in this, I would say, is figure out what success is to you in that moment. So it's not really all about material things. It can be anything from, would it make you happy to travel all over the world, or work for a charity or something like that? It doesn't have to be material. And I think trying to figure out what that success looks like for you is really important when it comes to making these decisions about your future, your career, and what's next. And just on this, I'd add that there's a line between the good fear and bad fear, and tune into that. If there's something that excites you but you're scared, go research that. Think a little bit more about that, because that is a space where so much growth and intrigue can happen. The second lesson or piece would be the career structure and professional identity. This is super important. Okay, so I'm a massive believer that your career does not need to be linear, and your job or your degree does not define who you are. You're not the company you work for. You're not the degree that you get. It's all about learning every step of the way, and figuring out new parts of yourself and following what you're really curious in. I really believe, and I think it's very true for myself, I see my career development and life as loads of chapters that kind of build into who I am as a person. And I use certain things from jobs I've learned, in design, and I apply them to other things, in my current fine art practice, for example. So again, it's not linear. I mean, it's fine if it is, but yeah, just be very open-minded, I would say, about the structure. You're also in the freelance entrepreneurial generation, so if that works for you, really embrace that. Career anxiety might come up as well, but just ride the wave, go back to your decision making, understand why you're doing things, and again, why and what that success and that goal looks like. And also have fun. Right, and the third one is, I'm sure you've heard this all before as well, with COVID, well-being. Honestly, physical, mental well-being if you don't look after that, you will not be able to live your best and fullest life. You won't be able to make the decisions that will be really important when it comes to your career, etc. You won't be able to fully seize life. So listen to it. I mean, I know it might be obvious, but take care of yourself. There's two pieces here. One is the more obvious: take breaks, don't burn out, working hundreds of hours a week like I did at certain points in my career. You've got one body and one mind, honestly. That's it. So just make the most of it and really listen to it. And then the second piece, I think, is more about how do you move through the world and what do your interactions with others look like? Because this does affect your well-being. How are you showing up in the way you hold yourself, in the way you speak, in how you think about yourself? So, for example, your self-worth and self-acceptance. This all links back to your well-being as well. Try and embrace over the years, and it's not easy, your full self. Be as authentic as you can in all the decisions that you're making. Again, as I said, it is a challenge, but your life will be most rewarding if you try and do this. And finally, I'd say try and understand who your support network is for well-being, right? So your friends and your family and your other pupils or your teachers at King's, who can you lean on when it comes to your well-being and getting that support that you need? Okay, last slide before I stop talking. So the summary is, you don't have to have it all figured out. As you've heard from my very winding career trajectory, I definitely didn't. I've kind of made it up as I've gone along. I've listened to, what am I interested in next? What makes me curious? Ooh, do I think I could grow from this next opportunity? Instead of just constantly like, I'm going on this particular path. I think the degree of openness and fluidity has been really important to my journey so far. So if I'm not a certified career coach, but if you are really stuck, I'm super happy to, accept emails right here. You can see hello@elinorhenry.com if you just want a little bit of advice, or maybe I can ask some constructive questions that will move things in your mind, or just get in touch if you're interested in learning more. And this is me painting in my studio that I was working from earlier this year. And that's it. Thank you so much. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks very much, El. That's a really fascinating presentation already. I mean, for me, I went from the age of 3, I've been in an educational institution. And wow. The question, because I went straight from school to uni in Australia, straight into teaching, but my decision-making process probably changed. I did an engineering degree, and it probably changed when I then looked into education and went from there. My question for you is, did you always wanted to do that sort of art design style degree, or did your decision-making as to what university course and what life direction, how much did that change from the time that you left King's to the time that you started university course?
So this is actually a great question. Just when I was figuring out what I wanted to, apply for at university in my last year, the career guidance counsellor, Paula Williams, strongly suggested that I do an art foundation in art and design. And I obviously was like, no, I've got this sorted. I want to do English literature, and then I'm going to do law conversion. I'm going to save the world being a human rights lawyer, Paula. That's what I'm going to do. And funnily enough, Paula was right. So sometimes you have to listen to outside of perspective. But I'd really say that for me, it was moments building up to each other. I got the inkling that I wanted to study further. When I got to Australia, I understood that you could actually earn a living from art and design. For some reason, I didn't really understand that growing up in the UK. And then it was really working as a designer. And then after that, moving to Google and actually having a lot of my creativity it wasn't as creative as a job. And then that, I would say, maybe end of 2018, which is when I was really like, oh, if I can do one thing, what would I regret, right? What would I regret if I was on my deathbed? And what came up was if I didn't try to go to art school. So.
And that's clearly not a financial decision, is it? Because when you're in a good paying work and then you go off to university, then all of a sudden, you've realised that's the sort of the dream, is it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've done everything backwards and sideways, but I think that's the beauty of life. And this is what I'm trying to say here. You don't need to do anything in the traditional sense, and you can still enjoy success and make a living and things like that. No, it wasn't a financial decision to go to art school at all. However, I would say that because I have a design background, I have a bit of a vision of how I would like to use fine art practice. So I think with anything like this, you really need to think about the broader picture. So what would leaving after that degree look like? How could you use it in the wide world? Or is it purely a passion that you absolutely love? And it's really critical to, enjoying your life.
Before, please, we've got a couple of questions already come in, but please start writing questions in on the Q&A on Zoom, or don't hesitate to put your virtual hand up to have a chat to Al yourself. Let's just explore before we go to some questions that have already come in, let's just explore the idea of decision making, because clearly there's a lot of times where you've chopped and changed through your decisions as to what you were going to do. There's no way when you went to Australia in 2012 that you were thinking you were going to come back for 8 years, right?
No way.
No. And when I came to England in 2005, I didn't think I was going to stay for, and live here the rest of my life. So things do change. So how do you find out what you really want, and what sort of guidelines do you have in life for decision making?
Greg, this is such a great question. And I think to start with, I'd say you're never going to know right in this moment what's going to happen in your whole life. I think you just let go of that idea right now. What I would say is, what I've personally found really useful is having a set of values, actually. And a few mentors have told me this over the years. You might not know what decisions you're coming up against. So two things really, the values and then something else. However, if you have a strong set of values, which can also change, by the way, you'll understand when you've got these decisions and these crossroads coming up, how to approach them. So for example, one of my values has been freedom, authenticity, and creativity. And so using that guideline, I've been able to, when presented with different opportunities, being like, okay, well, does this reflect my value structure? Would I be compromising on any of my values if I went down this road? And so, yeah, as I said, I found that extremely helpful. The second thing I found helpful is, if you're like me and you don't know, you're very open-minded, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, what you can do is just listen to yourself and be like, is this exciting to me right now? Is this making me curious? Do I think I can learn from this? So you basically listen to your reactions. Am I excited by this? Could this be a challenge that is comfortable, well, mid-comfortable and achievable and pushing me somewhere? I think the point is, are you constantly growing and learning and doing things that add to your catalogue of who you are as a person? That's, what I would say. Is that kind of what you were thinking, Greg?
Yeah, it is actually. And I sort of see it as it links very much to well-being, because what you're basically trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that part of being happy is exploring the things that you find curious, and not just being stuck in a rut and doing something just because. Completely.
So I guess an example of this would be, I didn't know. When I was in Australia in 2013, I decided to defer my uni degree in the UK again another year. So what I'm saying is you can actually do things one step at a time, year by year, month by month, get through this next chapter and then make a decision after that. That can be really, really helpful. And that's basically what I've done with my life.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to one of the first questions. Andrew asks, you're remarkably self-confident, and that's fabulous. And is that innate, or do you think, was it encouraged by your King's education?
This is a great question, actually. Thanks, Mark. Do you know what? I think King's did help me flourish in confidence a little bit. So for context, I went to a girls' grammar school before, and I think going to King's really opened me up to living in a mixed world with all genders, and it almost had more of like a university feel, I'm going to say, without having ever done an undergrad. And it was sort of, we had freedom to discuss and debate and go into a city and make our own decisions. But I do think that must have attributed in a sense. I would also say, I think working at Google, you're basically taught and you get given opportunities to basically, think about how you appear to others. And so I think through sheer experience over time, I've learned to portray myself a bit more confidently. Trust me, I was nervous before doing this. I think everyone is. It's just, I guess, how you portray yourself. Hope that helps.
Absolutely. I'd like to go to another question asked. And I think this comes back to this idea of courage. And a lot of people like going on that year abroad. And I can remember when I was 18, I don't think it was 17 or 18 and I was leaving school. The idea of being on the other side of the world, it sort of blows my mind a little bit. And the question asked, which is clearly from a current pupil in King's, how do you build up the courage to actually go and take that leap?
That's a great question, current pupil. Okay, so I think going with friends really helped. It wasn't me going to the other side of the world just solo. That would be a whole different kettle of fish, I think. I would say key to it, though, was excitement. I think my excitement of discovery and freedom and exploration really outweighed any nervousness around I hate spiders, snakes, everything in Australia can kill you in the forest, etc. So yeah, over-indexing on the excitement and the possibility, I think really and you know what, if there's something that you think that you should be doing and your fear is outweighing your excitement and your ability to see possibilities, I think it take time to reflect on that process and be like, is this right for me? Or maybe do more research, and then you'll find things that excite you further, and that will give you the courage to go further, or find friends to go with.
My notes here say that you did go with a couple of friends to work on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Now, in the jungle in Australia, I do know that Australia has some of the most deadly snakes and spiders in the world, sort of top 5 out of 10. So come on, tell me, how did you get that gig? How did you get onto that gig? And what was it like working on that when you first went to Australia?
Oh, again, great question. So I got this through a fellow Broughton's family member who, again, really, really lucky and privileged to be given this opportunity to go work on her uncle's catering company. And so we were catering assistants for 600 staff, including any celebrities that got kicked off the jungle. And so it was something, it was wild. We would all get on this little bus in the morning or in the evening. We would drive for about 40 minutes into the middle of this bush. And I just remember one morning just putting out the plates and having to step over the hugest snake I had ever seen. I think it was a boa constrictor or something, and all the other staff were like, yeah, that's all right, just step over it. And I was like, excuse me? So that's one little story. The second was we were working in the kitchen and, making cakes, etc. And someone found a funnel web spider. Obviously, if you know anything about spiders, this is deadly. So yeah, I felt like I had a real Australian brush with nature. But apart from that, it was a real get in, work hard, meet loads of people, and just explore the east side of Australia.
Andrew is asking a very sort of almost left field question here. If you imagine a parallel universe, what do you think alternate Elinor might be doing now had she followed the more traditional career trajectory?
Oh, Elinor in a parallel universe would be probably a human rights lawyer, like working, I don't know, working for someone, or maybe working in publishing, reading manuscripts and I don't know, approving them to go on to the next thing. That's a great question. I've actually never had to think about that. Thank you.
Would you, and sort of a backup, a follow on to that Andrew's asking is sort of what do you think? What would you like the alternate Elinor, and sort of, I suppose, do you think you'd be just as happy as you are now?
Again, great question. It's funny because I can't see the chat, so it's a complete surprise to me what comes up. I think, that is such a good question. I do think, I genuinely think that if I had ended up in that path, I would feel a sense of fulfillment because I'd be adhering to some of my values, such as, giving back. I'm really passionate about things like global women's rights, etc. So I think I would have a sense of fulfillment. However, creativity and art is a huge core part of me, and I do think that I would have felt a dissonance, something missing, like a dissatisfaction seeping in from the sides if unless I was like a side hobby artist, who knows. But yeah, I do think there would be something missing for me personally, but hard to tell.
We sort of explored before, more specifically, how and when did you realise that you didn't want to go to university to read English literature?
So I think I was a month in to Australia, and I just remember being like, this is cool. This is very cool. I was working alongside all these film editors and lighting designers and prop makers. I'd never even heard of, I'd never even explored any of these things. And so in conversation with all these people, my mind was starting to blow a bit about all the different possibilities. And so I made that decision in, I think 2013, the following year, to defer again, much to my parents' disappointment. Sorry, mum and dad, if you're listening to this. They came round in the end though. And then I took another decision in 2014 after I basically gave myself a bit of a time limit, and after working at this, I was working as a waitress, and I got promoted to event coordinator. And on that job, I had interactions with these designers, and that made me write to all the design agencies in Sydney asking for an internship. And one person replied. Sometimes it only takes one person. And I went for an interview. I took all my drawings, all my sketches, and they gave me an internship 1 day a week for, I think I did like 4 or 5 months. And it was really then that I cemented my decision that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to pursue design and not English literature. Yeah.
Somebody else asks, it's very interesting chat at the moment for them. And where do you think you'll be in 10 years' time?
These are great questions. how old will I be? 38. I hope to have traveled to lots of countries. I've got Costa Rica high on my list. Let's see. I hope to own a dog. Fingers crossed. I hope to have been in some exhibitions. I hope to feel a sense of achievement, but also fulfillment when looking at my art practice so far. But I also hope that in 10 years, I still have that itch, that sort of restlessness, if you will, to keep going and discovering new opportunities and collaborations and learning about people and things. I hope to have read loads more books and met loads more people, helped people if I can, and generally just be a little bit older, wiser, and hopefully reasonably happy in what I'm doing and where I'm going next. I hope that answers your question. A bit vague, but there we go.
Oh, look, I think it's a great answer, and I'd also add to that, do it before you settle down with the family. That's absolutely for sure, because it becomes a lot harder to go down that sort of almost impulsive, what shall I do next, sort of exciting decision-making process. You're talking a lot about basically what you do in a career. How do you get your stakeholders on board? You talked about parents weren't happy, whether it be parents, whether it be the guardians, whether it be teachers, friends, and how do you have those constructive conversations about career?
This is a really, really good one that I've learned just through trial and error. What I'd say is that, especially if you're a current King's pupil under the age of 18, you have people in your life who essentially you need their buy-in, you need their support, whether that be family, guardian, teachers, etc., to write your reports, etc. But being defensive or hostile isn't going to get you anywhere. Trust me, I've tried it. It doesn't work. So I think you need to be as strategic as possible, right? Tap into that business side of your brain. Think about who do you need to convince, and understand what their misgivings might be about your certain career path. Ask questions, stay curious, right? And then do your research. Really do your research, because pitching a vision isn't just for the business boardroom. You can do it for your life as well. What I'd say is gather all the reasons why you want to go in this direction. What is it going to take? What are the potential outcomes? What are the potential challenges? You need to kind of do your due diligence to show you're actually serious about this and you've done your research. And then you've thought of the problems, and you've also thought another layer down of how you can mitigate these problems potentially. Also, as a side note, I'm not saying have all the answers baked. That's just not going to happen. But show that you've actually committed to this idea, and that you're being very serious about it. And then lastly, I'd say really think emotionally about why is this important to you? Why do you need these people in your life to get on board? Gather all of that and have an open conversation. And if that conversation doesn't go to plan, again, don't get angry, don't give up. Take what you've learned from the conversation, do further research, and then come back to them again and again. And you never know. I mean, to be honest, it took me years to understand that I wanted to go to art school, and to have my parents feel comfortable with the idea of their daughter going to art school at 28 years old. So yeah, just keep going back to it.
We're going to continue down the line of exploring sort of decision making, and one of the questions, and you've sort of answered this already, but it has just come through again, and perhaps you can give a slightly different take on this. Sort of what really brought you to think that you wanted to go for 8 years? Was it while you're there? How did you do it? You've talked about making a plan, that clearly considered decisions are important. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So I never knew I was going to go for 8 years. What I did eventually understand and learn is how to consider what was coming up next for me. So I think it's really important to know that I wasn't attached to going back to the UK. I would have probably moved pretty much anywhere in the world. I was excited. I'm very open to that. So I understand that that's not going to be for everyone, right? You might have family situations or personal situations that don't allow for that. However, every time I had to basically review my personal situation when I was in Australia or when I was in Singapore, I made sure to check in with myself basically every year. How much longer do I want to stay here? Do I want to go anywhere else? Do I want to go back to the UK? And then when I was presented with these, if you like, call them problem statements or whatever, I then used the decision-making processes based on my values and based on really listening to myself and what excited me and what didn't to move to the next phase. An example of this is I was, I think, 5.5 years into living in Australia, and I started to get a bit of an itch, and I started to think, should I be moving back to the UK now? What's next for me? And then I started doing research. I looked at other countries I would live in. I would I made different scenarios, and I looked at various jobs. That's what I'm trying to say as well. And really do your research. And it just so happened that I was approached by Google whilst I was working in Sydney. They first approached me actually for a job in Sydney, but then in the interview offered me to interview for a job in Singapore. And so when that decision came up, I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, does this excite me? Does this make me curious? Do I think I can learn from this? Does this job and this place adhere to this current set of values that I have? And it was a yes, and I moved. Feel free to ask a follow-up question as well on this if I'm not quite getting to the crux of what you want to know.
No, I think it's a fascinating part there. Can I explore a little bit more about your time at Google? With quality and diversity was something that was part of that job. And when did you start at Google? What year?
I started end of 2018.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we've just appointed a quality and diversity coordinator. We've just appointed someone for an employee for wellbeing. I feel like we're all of a sudden, even though we are actually ahead of the curve in a way, we're still best part of 4 years behind the curve that you're on there. Can you tell us a little bit about that role within Google and the importance of that role now, even more so now?
So, yeah, it's funny having been hired into a team and a role focusing on these things within learning and development. So, as you said, onboarding, well-being, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now post Black Lives Matters and COVID, these issues kind of being way more prominently talked about. So at the time, I was hired in having had a UX, that's user experience design, for anyone background in creating digital products and digital experiences for clients and their employees. I was brought into the onboarding team to begin with, and we had to look at how to create an inclusive culture that prioritized well-being within Google for everyone joining. So an example of that was creating programs that taught every person joining the company about unconscious bias, right? And so essentially with product development, you really have to think about who is creating that product and what biases they have. Otherwise, the end product is going to be filled with biases. So that was a really interesting example of work. Another one I would say is, especially working in the Asia Pacific region, and with all the time zone differences that we had for teams in San Fran, there was a culture of overworking. We were talking, there's 5 a.m. till midnight, and a culture of well, I'm actually doing more hours than you, so I'm worthy of more. And so we really had to try and bring in learning programs, digital and on-ground learning programs, to change people's attitudes to what success looked like in the workplace, and understanding that it's a marathon, not a sprint, too, and things like that, and how you could show your value and add value in different ways as opposed to just hours. And so when so I did that for a while, and then the pandemic hit, and I was on the team that redesigned the whole digital onboarding system for the entirety of Google. And that was another opportunity to increase, how we were going to set up all these people, because essentially the way we saw it, if we set up everyone who is building anything to do with this brand, or going out to other businesses, or marketing this brand, if we make sure that they are really, really educated on bias, diversity, equity, inclusion, well-being, they can then reverberate these teachings, and or even subconsciously interact in better ways with everyone else that interacts with Google products and services on a daily basis. And if you think about that, that's a huge amount of people. So that's the way we kind of aligned our vision and goal with the work. And then after that, I worked on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, including race equity, again, for employees coming into the system, and also advising on people running external marketing events, etc.
And was that before the Black Lives Matter movement? Was that preempting, or was that actually a post?
So that last bit was post.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you feel that was a little bit of an adjustment because of the much needed brought to everybody's attention?
100%. It was we'd been doing some of the work, but it became radically clear that we had not been doing enough. And so it was really all hands on deck to try and create something that did justice to the topic at hand. And I think a really important lesson in this that I've learned is that you can't, as someone coming from racial privilege, for example, myself being white, you have to lean in and do the work. You can't expect others to educate you. You have to try and lift others up and, make space for voices. And I think that was a really, really important lesson.
We'll just sort of frame the end of Google before we go to one or two other questions from the audience. It's such a massive global brand, Google. What was it like being interviewed for Google, and almost why leave? Why leave when there's so many possibilities within such an organization like that?
I get asked this a lot. Okay, so interviewing for Google was wild. I did 5 interviews and then a few informal chats on the side. I found it thrilling and daunting at the same time, because you're meeting, my interviewees were they were great people, and they were just so accomplished, and it was so intimidating. But what I found, I managed to have a little bit of fun, and I managed to create a little bit of rapport with anyone I was in conversation with, and I think that helped. I obviously don't think I can divulge too much, but it was very difficult and very interesting, and very about the how and the why of doing things, and the culture of who you are and how you interact with people, not just I did X, Y, Z and it created that. It was very much behavioral as well. And then the second part to your question was why did I leave Google? I honestly felt like I had to. I took some time off, and this is why I was saying take time off if you can and if you need. So I took time off to reflect a little bit on what I wanted to do. The company was wanting me to move back to Singapore, basically, and I didn't want to. And I also felt like I wasn't getting a creative and artistic satisfaction, so to speak. There was something else that was happening. And so I actually took on career coaching, and I did several sessions with this amazing coach who just held up the mirror to me and asked me all these difficult, challenging questions about myself. And I came out of that with a new set of values, interestingly. I mean, new and adjusted. And I just, over months and months and months, gathered courage and tested, talked to friends, etc., and then really ultimately listened to myself and decided to leave on really good terms, as good as possible, and just tell myself that the door is always open. This is not over. It's just one chapter closing. I can try and get back into Google if I want in the future. And also, I really had the what if, as I said earlier, I had this burning curiosity about art school and just giving it a shot when I, at this point in my life, I had the opportunity to do so. So I just really wanted to take the risk, so to speak.
Andrew's got another really fascinating question, and something I think we all sometimes ponder. Do you think that you've done what you've done? Is it all about jumping off the conveyor belt of life, almost, that sometimes we all feel that we're on, that you didn't want to be on, and you seem to have done really well doing so? Do you think that's been part of your motivation?
Yeah, do you know what? I think there is a part to that, because I really didn't like the idea of I don't want to call it conveyor belt life, because I respect if that's going to give someone satisfaction and happiness and well-being, then you should do that. You should really follow that. For me personally, it didn't fit. I think that was important. I actually found it quite difficult, and I felt like there was a lot of stigma around not having a uni degree. A lot of the time, to be honest, I felt like, so even in Google, I think only 11% of people don't have uni degrees. And so I found myself having to explain over and over that I didn't. But they did give me a sense of, okay, well, I don't have this, I can prove myself. And so maybe that was also a bit of a fire in me to see what I could make out of my life and not be, not have regrets, basically. That's what I'm trying to say as well. It's a great question.
Where Stuart asks, where can we see more of your artwork? Is there more about yet, and sort of where's that heading? Are there potentially dreams of what style of art you're going to produce? I've sort of changed question here, and where you think your artwork might be on display.
Thanks for the question, Stuart. So I currently am predominantly a painter, a mixed media, sort of semi-abstract, large-scale painter. You can see some of my artwork on my website that was on the slide. It's elinorhenry.com. I don't know what's going to happen. So the course I'm on with the RCA is a pre-masters. It's a postgrad pre-masters, and they describe it as taking everything you've ever known and breaking everything apart to see what comes out of it. So I have no idea what's going to emerge artistically out of this practice. Who knows? I might be a sculptor in a year. I might be a photographer. At the moment, I consider myself predominantly a painter. And that one thing I do want to do, though, is get into installations and public art installations. Again, that's me following what I'm curious about and what interests me. So I'm going to explore that and basically see what happens. Stay tuned. thanks for the question.
Thanks, Al. I think unless somebody else comes with that, I've got one more really framing question to end, unless somebody else comes up with a question, and then we can wrap it up. A lot of this is about career development. And can you give some advice? Are there any good frameworks when it comes to career development?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the one that we use at Google is called the pivot method, and it was created by a Googler. It's available in book form, but also in just online. Where's my chat? It's pivot. For some reason my chat's disappeared, but basically it's pivot, P-I-V-O-T. Just type it into Google, the pivot method. I've used it myself. I think it's really, really useful. It basically gives you some questions and activities to do reflectively, including values actually, and that can help you better understand where you're coming from, what's your context, what's your perspective, what are your values, etc. So check it out.
Oh, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed it. I just want to sum up on a couple of things that, and please jump in and correct me on any aspects there. Your advice really is follow your dreams, be brave, do what excites you and intrigues you, and with intellectual curiosity at all times at the heart, but don't be impulsive with that. When you're talking important career life choices, do your research, be considered, get out what we used to call, get your butcher sheet of paper and write down the different aspects of the pros and the cons of what you are. Talk to people, take advice, listen. Have I missed anything?
I think that's a great summary, Greg. What I would add is it's okay to not know what your dream is, by the way. So what I would say is follow what you think might be your dream to begin with. And by going down that path, you might discover something, that is actually your dream. An example of this is basically Alan Rickman, I found out today, studied graphic design at the Royal College of Art, which is where I'm at. So anything can happen, but just start somewhere. Start with something that interests and excites you and see what happens.
And to sort of, again, follow on that, I feel like a bit of a discussion piece here. Yeah, I think in my life, and clearly it's happened in your life, you sort of do try to plan in advance, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. Don't be afraid to change tack. And actually, there are so many sliding door moments where I think I made that choice, and that's where all of a sudden my life has completely taken me in a different direction.
Yeah, and that's such a beautiful thing. I think to your point, embrace change. Don't be afraid of it. It can just blow out your perspective of what you thought was your understanding of the world and your career and your passions. Be change ready, I would say as well. Yeah, and also you can learn from everything, and you can take what you've learned and bring it into things that are completely unrelated.
Elinor, thank you again on behalf of everybody that's watching now, on behalf of, I'm sure all the pupils will see this as part of the what we call Life Matters, a PSHE program, end up happening, little snippets that I'm sure will come through from that. Thank you for your time tonight. It's been absolutely enriching. I've sort of got one more thing I've written down on my sheet, and that is, this feels like an unfinished story, because and it feels like we've ridden the trials and tribulation of your last 10, 12 years. And I haven't sort of said this before, because sometimes it feels like a natural, this is what you've got to give me for a talk, but I'd love you to come back and give us another one of these, online or in person, in whatever number of years' time, because I do feel that there, we want to hear the next stage, what's happened next with Elinor Henry.
I love that. You know what? Just calendar me in 10 years' time and we'll see who's about. Sounds good to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, Elle, thank you so much. Thank you.